Silence Equals Death is an influential piece of art created in 1989 by an artist named Keith Haring. In this presentation, our group will provide background information on the piece, as well as sharing our reactions, interpretation, and evaluation of the piece. Keith Haring is an extremely interesting artist, and here our group is going to present some basic and interesting facts about him. We are also going to explain how Haring is relevant to the course.
Keith Haring was born May 4th, 1958 in Reading, Pennsylvania. He learned his basic cartooning skills from both his father and the popular culture of the time. He went to the Ivy School of Professional Art in Pittsburgh, but dropped out after only 2 semesters enrolled. He moved to New York City in 1978 and enrolled in the School of Visual Arts and became very involved in the underground art scene. Haring even achieved international recognition while he was still alive. Unfortunately, he died of AIDS-related illness in 1990 at the age of 31. Haring produced hundreds of works from 1980 to 1989. He was dedicated to making a form of art that was truly public. Haring was openly gay during the AIDS crisis, a time when homophobia ran high. A year after being diagnosed with AIDS, Haring established the Keith Haring Foundation with its mandate being to provide funding and imagery to AIDS organizations and children's programs, as well as to expand the audience of Haring's work. He created one of his most famous works, Crack His Whack, illegally. He was an activist and created works for the anti-apartheid movement, the anti-nuclear movement, and AIDS awareness. Haring is an artist who is very relevant to the artists that we've been studying over the summer. Over the time of the course, we have studied many artists who represent minorities or distinct cultures. Keith Haring is an openly gay artist who used his artistic abilities to increase awareness of HIV/AIDS in a time where homosexuals and people with AIDS were highly discriminated against.
An initial reaction would most generally be one of curiosity. Seems to be fairly simplistic at first, until the second glance, in which the viewer really observes the shapes that appear to be transparently covering this large, brightly colored triangle. Personally, our group found it neat that there was this delay in really taking the time to look at the details of the people, because the outline and transparency give the illusion of looking right through them. Pink often symbolizes universal love and harmony, but hot pink, on the other hand, has a few more implications. While it may symbolize all those things also, hot pink has an air of promiscuity and sexuality. The borders where the hot pink interacts with the black background is also extremely interesting because the transition from bright color to dark color gives the illusion of enhanced resolution and an extremely sharp edge. A study of the role of color in attractiveness found that males preferred brighter colors to females, and conversely, females preferred softer colors. The basic structure Haring builds this piece around is a square and a triangle, which is perhaps using all these straight edges to display meaning. The mid-ground is a perfectly shaped triangle, and the background is formatted around a perfect square. Geometry makes dimensions dependable. The same shape, drawn with the same relative line lengths, will always make the same angles. Using geometry, the lines on a plane can be consistently enlarged in scale to lay out the dimensions of the full-scale structure. Another theme our group seemed to notice pretty quickly is the essence of transparency in the piece. At first, or at some early point when viewing, the viewer must look through the outlines of people in the foreground and almost block it out entirely to truly see what is behind the outlines in the midground and foreground. The outlines of people in the foreground are similar to that of a window, in that a window has a sense of openness, although there is still some separation between the viewer and object. Windows also bring in light from the exterior as a functional purpose, and, interestingly enough, this bright pink triangle seems to be just outside this looking glass of peekabooing figures etched into the foreground. This is a quote from Keith Haring that reads, "My contribution to the world is my ability to draw. I will draw as much as I can, for as many people as I can, for as long as I can. Now let's get into more depth with Silence Equals Death. Silence Equals Death features a hot pink triangle with stick figures outlined in white. The figures are either covering their eyes, their ears, or their mouth. The portrayal of these figures covering their eyes, ears, or mouth is meant to display the oppression gay people felt as a result of the way they were treated by society. Haring created Silence Equals Death during the HIV/AIDS crisis or epidemic in America. The pink triangle shown in the work is an image that has been appropriated and reclaimed to symbolize queer oppression since the time of the Nazi regime, who used it to mark many queer individuals, mainly gay men, in the concentration camps. Silence Equals Death itself is the model for the HIV/AIDS activism group ACT UP. The image itself is representative of Haring's many works that raged against the treatment of the queer community during the crisis, and it is also representative of the neo-pop art and graffiti art movements of the 1980s. These movements are exemplified by the use of bright colors, bold lines, and social commentary that are characteristics found in all of his works. Keith Haring died of AIDS-related issues and spent the last years of his life devoting his imagery to AIDS activism and awareness. The historical context of this piece is based in the specific oppression of the gay community during the 1980s. Keith Haring's intentions for Silence Equals Death surrounded HIV and AIDS awareness. Keith Haring, as an openly gay man with AIDS, wanted to spread awareness of the disease. Silence Equals Death reveals the way homosexual people felt ostracized from society. Haring's intentions for this piece, as well as many other of his pieces, was to increase awareness of AIDS and stop the oppression of people suffering from the disease. How does Silence Equals Death relate to the course? Over the course of the semester, we have been learning about various oppressed groups and how that oppression is represented in art. The historical context between Silence Equals Death reveals the meaning and oppression behind this work of art, which in turn relates this piece to the other pieces we have learned about this semester.
Keith Haring created Silence Equals Death 1989 to show the stigma around AIDS and how that stigma led to innocent deaths. During the AIDS crisis of the 1980s, AIDS were seen as a homosexual disease. People were treated as dirt, and it was hard for them to get treated due to people's lack of approval of their sexuality. Eventually, people came to the realization that everyone can get HIV/AIDS, but that does not take away from its beginnings in homophobic behavior. The pink triangle is supposed to represent the triangles that Hitler made gay men in concentration camps wear. The triangle is inverted to signify that they were on the bottom of society. The many figures, with their hands over their ears, eyes, and mouth, represent the see no evil, speak no evil, and hear no evil motif. This also shows how the Reagan administration purposefully suppressed the true nature of HIV/AIDS and led to the death of thousands of the LGBTQ+ community. Haring was making a statement that showed how the deaths of these people are in the government's hands. The government had a responsibility to their people, and they failed them. Haring titled the work perfectly since the ignorance and silence toward those in the queer community led to death. Silence Equals Death, 1989, is a true masterpiece. The work depends heavily on viewers' background knowledge and attention to mass media. The artwork does not include any words or even any facial expressions. It gets across the point of view perfectly based on the stances of the figures and the image of the triangle. The use of the pink triangle links the handling of the AIDS crisis to the likelihood of a fascist regime without explicitly explaining it to the audience. This work most definitely shows a significant human problem that is still ongoing today. While we have come a long way from the AIDS crisis with same-sex marriage officially being legal in 2015 across all 50 states, there are still deeply rooted homophobic ideals being spread and used. The aesthetic power most definitely moves the audience. A key component to the work is that the figures have no gender characteristics, no race characteristics, no sexual preferences indicators, with the emphasis being that they are human as well. People are people, and they shouldn't be abandoned for something out of their control. which makes this piece ultimately so worth examining. This project has opened my eyes to the activism side of art. A lot of the classics deemed as art are hung up in museums and seem to be very one-dimensional. Haring's purpose was demonstrated in each one of his artworks, and his tactic toward getting noticed showed how much it meant to him. He would do his work on the walls of the subway or anywhere in NYC to get his message across. This type of activism art is a refreshing concept that is still being used today. Overall, this class opened my eyes to the diversity in art and the lack of representation for these minorities. The cultural diversification of America needs to be represented through art because art is our type of historical record. All the perspectives I've learned are beautiful, and I'm so grateful for being exposed to them.
This course and project has introduced me to new ways about thinking of art. Before taking this class, I viewed art based on the talent I thought I saw. I observed only the surface level of a piece of art rather than understanding the intricacies of each piece. Keith Haring's piece, Silence Equals Death, opened my eyes to a time period in the United States where homophobia was extremely common and used as a discriminating factor. It was interesting to see how Haring used his artistic abilities to raise awareness for AIDS and lift the oppression gay people commonly felt. This piece has taught me a lot about the importance of historical context on a piece of art, and how one's understanding of historical context can alter the interpretation of a piece of art.
This course has taught me a lot about cultural diversity and some of the art that reflects culture and relations between different cultures. I learned much about art and different mediums and tools that can be used to create complex masterpieces. One of my favorites was the Chinese artist Xia, who used gunpowder to ignite his works of art. In relation to our project, our group got a chance to do some research on the homosexual community and the impact of the AIDS epidemic in the 90s. This project also shows the interconnectedness of the LGBT community over time, dating back to the Holocaust. I really like the idea of how the artist is able to take a symbol of hatred and turn it into a message of positivity.
Keith Haring is my favorite artist, so I didn't learn much about his history I didn't already know. What was new to me that I discovered through this project was his level of activism and his dedication to a public form of art. I was really inspired by his courage to be so openly queer during the time period he was active. On a separate note, the class has allowed me to appreciate the cultural relevance of art more and recognize its importance in the sphere of the art world. It has also shown me that even though we think of certain spaces as safe and inclusive, there can always be more work done to ensure that the things we love are safe spaces for everyone. Keith Haring's work is important and inspirational, and this class has taught me to appreciate it on a level I had been unable to before.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to our presentation. We all hope that you learned about Keith Haring and his masterpiece, Silence Equals Death.